All right, good morning, everyone. So just want to thank everybody for taking time out of their morning to join us today. And really going to be sharing our story for Dish Network and how we partnered with Atlassian and our journey to actually build out our infrastructure. So want to know who here has actually heard of Dish Network? Raise your hand. Awesome. Who here is a customer of Dish Network? Okay, so not quite as many. Anybody call out, what have you heard? What do you know when you think of Dish Network? What do you think of? Yes, definitely. That's kind of our main bread and butter. But anybody know that Dish is actually getting into the wireless business? We're actually trying to become the fourth largest wireless carrier and building our own Open RAN 5G cloud native network. So with that being said, we have some big key milestones that are coming up. And one of the big ones is coming up in just a couple months. We have to hit 70% of the US covered by our networks by June 14th. So massive, massive goals that we have to hit. And in order to achieve that, we have to install over 25,000 towers. So right now, I think last time I met with the team, it was a week or so ago, installing over 100 towers a day. So that's the large boxes as you're going down the road, all the cabling and everything that goes on. But in order to do that, we're doing it as an Open RAN network. So that means instead of picking one or two vendors, we're doing this with 50, 60, 75 different vendors. So that box might be one vendor, the hardware inside, a different vendor, the software inside, another vendor, the cabling down to the ground, another vendor, the units on the ground, a different vendor, and the list goes on and on and on. So the challenge that we have is getting all of those vendors to work together. So behind me, you'll see some of the posters that we actually have up around at our headquarters, because the vendors don't like to come play with us sometimes. And so we've actually told them all the work that you do needs to be in Jira. I'm like, yeah, whatever. No, we're serious. And so no Jira, no money. You want to get paid, it better be in Jira. Or, oh, I got an issue. Okay, well, where's the Jira ticket? Oh, I don't have one. Okay, well, if it's not in Jira, it doesn't exist. We have to see what's going on. So we need to know that. So today, I'm going to kind of play off of what you guys have heard, everybody else in some of the different talks about Legos. When you think about building the Atlassian tool stack, it really is kind of like building with Legos. So another show of hands, who here has ever built anything with Legos before? Awesome. Now, out of you guys, how many of you like to have a picture of what it's supposed to look like and those clear step-by-step directions? All right, so look around. Y'all are going to need some therapy after this, because we definitely did not have that when we started building. We ended up a little bit more like this. So for all of those in Vegas, this is pretty much how we ended up. Interesting story. During COVID, my wife and I got into building Legos, and this was actually one of the evening events after a few glasses of wine that we built after our 3-year-old went to bed. So if you want to see more pictures, we have quite the interesting photo album. Be more than happy to share when we get to Bash. So who am I? My name's Adam Nichols. I've been at Dish now for almost 10 years. Started as a project manager, ran our database architecture team for a while, enterprise product catalog team, was an agile coach, coaching over 75 teams, have trained over 1,200 people in Agile, Kanban, Scrum, different methodologies. And a few years ago, was actually asked to come help out in the wireless division. And so came over and really no clue what I was really getting myself into, but have been doing that now. Got letters and numbers and certifications and all that, but truthfully, hopefully the talk today will kind of show more about the experience. So one thing I do want to do regarding the work that we're doing is shout out to my team, both those guys that are here and the folks at home. Without them, I wouldn't have a story to tell and share with you today. It's really those people on the team, the day in and day out work that they do that make this important. So this is a picture that we actually have at our headquarters. When you walk in, this is the vision for Dish Network, to change the way the world communicates. Interesting side note, that large, strange looking thing next to it is actually a satellite. Comes from one of our original satellites. And our founder likes to say that's the $10 million mistake. Because somebody didn't say something, and then that mistake on that satellite cost him $10 million. And so he puts that in the lobby of our headquarters. So every day you walk by it, it's a reminder to speak up. So side note that I always think is a little interesting. So taking that vision, the mission statement for our team, we've brought that a little bit closer to home. Transforming the way teams communicate through transparency, collaboration, and optimization. And I kind of want to double click on this one a little bit just to dig in. So transforming the way, that is fundamentally changing how things are currently being done from the status quo. And communication, and this is really to me the most important part, communication is the exchange of data between two or more parties. And if you really think about it, any activity, data is an output. And it could even be argued that that data could be more important than the activity itself. Because if you think about a defect, when you're working with defects, fixing that defect, resolving that defect, yes, it's important. But if you think about hundreds, thousands of defects, and the data that you can start to get from those defects and collect and then be able to aggregate that data, and then be able to run AI or machine learning on that data and do predictive analysis, make your network better. That data is more important than that single defect. And so that really is something that we'll be highlighting and hitting on more. And transparency, that's making work visible. If you don't see it, if you can't measure it, you can't fix it, you can't make it better. So whether that's putting data into a system like Jira, and tracking your work, whether it's seeing dashboards, making things visible so that you can see, ultimately leads to collaboration. This is allowing one team to work amongst itself or multiple teams to work together, or in our case, internal teams to work with our external vendors, being able to collaborate and then in turn optimize, continually making things better because you can see it, you can work together, and you can improve it. So hopefully today, I'll be able to show you how we've actually gone through and implemented that. So, there we go. So who is this talk really aimed for? Really, when I think about this, I think of a couple different key stakeholders for you out here in the audience, and hopefully this resonates with some of you. Because you might be a sponsor, or an executive, or a decision maker. You might be actually in the process of standing up your own instance, launching a new line of business, and trying to figure out what tools should we use. And so you need that reliable, real-time data so that you can make decisions. But then you're probably concerned about cost. There's a lot of options out there. So obviously I'm not the salesperson, so I'm not talking to you about cost, but why did we choose the solutions that we chose? Or you could be what I like to refer to as the builder. That's either the system admins or the coaches who are actually building that infrastructure and actually helping to support the teams and the customers that are going to use it. But you might wonder, how much work is this going to take? How hard is this to do? Because you're looking for that single source of truth or some sort of platform to provide your stakeholders. Or you could be a producer. You could be that scrum master, that product owner, that developer or engineer who is actually using the tools. And you might be trying to look for some sort of solution because maybe you don't know why you're working on a certain task. Maybe you don't understand the priority or what it's related to. Or there's just so much turnover that there's a lot of tribal knowledge within your organization that gets lost, and you're looking for some way to be able to find that information. But you don't want to have to work in multiple systems. There might be 3 or 4 or 5 applications. You don't want a swivel chair, and you just want one source. So we'll show you today how we actually have solved some of those issues as well. So when I walked in 2 years ago, this was pretty much what it was like. I'm sure all of you have felt this way when you've walked into a new project, into a new team, into a new organization. It was a dumpster fire. And why do I say that? Literally, when I walked in, I was given an Excel spreadsheet with 50 defects on it. This is how our team tracks defects. And I was just like, oh, okay. But then I went to the next team and I was like, all right, where are your defects? Well, hold on, let me pull up my email. And it just went on and on and on, and every team was doing things differently. So we needed a way to have all of these vendors be able to collaborate without being able to see into each other's work, but we as Dish needed to see what's going on. So I like to use the spaceship analogy where each of our vendors needed to be able to look up into the requirements that we have so that Samsung or Motorola or vendor ABC, whoever that may be, would be able to look up and see what are the requirements that we have for them to deliver, but then we as Dish can look across all of those vendors and look down and see what they're working on, see their status, see how they're doing. So we are really looking for that single source for all of our data and all of our information. So what was our fire extinguisher to put out that dumpster fire? Well, we wanted to build an enterprise scale collaboration platform to be that single source of truth. Somewhere that both Dish and our partners could collaborate on intake, design, development, testing, defects, deployments, release management, all of that together. So after going through and looking at different options, we landed on the Atlassian platform. And why? I like to use the analogy, there are certain tools out there that are kind of like a medium rare filet mignon. If that's what you want, it's perfect. It comes out of the box, it's exactly everything you want for that medium rare filet. But if you want mashed potatoes, sucks to be you. You want it rare? Nope, can't do it. You want a glass of wine? Not gonna happen. But the Atlassian platform is like raw hamburger meat. You can have anything you want. You want tacos? Sweet, just gotta make them. You want a hamburger? Awesome, let's make it up. You want spaghetti? Grab some tomatoes. You can pretty much build anything you want, but you gotta know how to cook, so you gotta know how to put it together, and then you gotta buy the other ingredients. So that was one of the things that I think was really powerful for us, is that we were able to pretty much make it our own and do everything that we needed to do. So where did we start? As Stephen Covey said, we started with the end in mind, literally. We started with defects. That was one of our biggest areas, our biggest challenge. As I mentioned, emails, spreadsheets, nobody knew what was going on. We are trying to build the first 5G Open RAN network, and these vendors are tracking work here, these vendors are tracking work here. Nobody had true end-to-end visibility into our various milestones and how the work was progressing. So what we did is we said, okay, we need to figure out how to bring all of this together. And by using the Atlassian platform, we were able to, within 2 weeks, build a production environment where we had vendors actually in there and tracking their work. And because of the security and the permissions and the way we set up groups, we were able to make sure that we are upholding the NDAs between those companies so that we could see the work and track what's going on, but we weren't violating any of the agreements or communication between them. So how did we do this? This is actually a picture of our defect workflow. And Bob in the audience is my boss, and him and I worked on this for probably 4 months to get it to this version 4.2. Large sticky note that was on a wall that we would go back to almost every day and just keep beating it up, beating it up, beating it up. But how did we get here? What we did is we worked with the teams that are actually solving those defects. And we asked them, what information do you guys need? When you're out there trying to fix a defect, what's the data that you need in order to fix it? So we went to the source and we said, hey guys, what do you need to know? Do you need to know the environment that you were testing in? Do you need to know what were the parameters? What was the setup? What was the steps that you were testing? What was your expected result? What actually happened? By trying to collect all of this information, we were able to identify, okay, now based upon that, we think it's going to be vendor X. So now that defect automatically gets assigned to that vendor, and that reduces the time that it takes to triage. So we just decided, well, we don't need a submitted state. We've got the information. We know who it goes to. We're assigning it directly to them. It automatically goes into the investigating state. By doing that, we reduced time by over 3 days of resolving defects because we didn't have to go back and forth and back and forth. Nope, this is yours, go fix it. So that was our first step. Now, to go from investigating to correcting, you got to tell me why that defect happened. I want to know the root cause. So now we're capturing that information and we're categorizing it. And now we're able to start to run reports and figure out if there's systemic root causes, let's fix those so we don't have as many defects down the road. So now we're also looking to be optimizing our system and getting better at what we're doing. And then after we've corrected it, we need to retest it. Well, I'm not going to take your word for it, no offense, but you're just a vendor and you just want my money. You better show me that you have a valid test case that has actually been passed, that actually validates that that defect can now be closed. So now I'm building out my test library. Now I'm having more testing, my regression tests that I can run continually to make sure that my system's performing the way that it should be performing. So did it make things better? Yes, I'm going to talk about some numbers later, but we definitely saw a marked improvement in what we were doing. So our success with defects became our own greatest enemy. Because now that we were telling all of these vendors, hey, you guys got to put your defects in here, you got to go into the Jira system, you got to update your defects. We went from, I don't know, probably 50 to 100 customers in our system that within 6 months, 1,200 users. Today, 2 years later, 4,000 users. So exponential growth over a 2-year time period. So then we started getting more and more requests. And that success became our greatest enemy. So now we're getting emails and chat messages and requests. And so we needed a way to fix that. We needed a way to tame the pigeons. And I like to use that analogy. And I always think of the pigeons are those people that fly by and poop on whatever you're doing with their request and their work and then just fly off. And you're just totally interrupts everything you're doing. So we needed a way that we could streamline that intake, be able to understand and get the data that we needed so that we could approve, prioritize, and deliver work for our customers. So again, we decided, well, we're already using Jira. Let's get into the JSM, Jira Service Management. And so we started to go through and look at our backlog of all the different types of requests that our team got. Whether it's modify my access, build a Confluence space, help train me on this situation, I think this is broken, I wanted a new custom workflow, all of those different types of requests, and we started to put those in buckets. So now we got our request types. And then for each of those request types, we decided, well, what's the information we need? Who is this going to impact? How many people? What teams? Who needs the access? Is this even approved by your boss? Just because you think it's a cool idea doesn't mean that it is or that it's actually useful. So we started to figure out what data do we need in order to make a decision, should we do this and how do we do this? And so now that became the foundation of our JSM platform. So we actually used that to start to build out our different request types. And from there, our approval flows. So one thing that was really nice and that the team came up with, it was an awesome idea, is once that ticket goes through an approval process, it actually automates creating the story or epic within the Jira software program. So instead of needing to pay exponential amounts of money for JSM, we have a very small group of users who are the approvals, and once approved, automate the ticket so that the teams can actually work out of the Jira software system, and really makes that bi-directional automation really seamless. So here we go. So once we had all of that, now we had all this data. Now we are able to say, okay, we have an incredible amount of data. And we've ended up partnering with Atlassian and their analytics and part of their early adoption program, and actually built out a team specifically for visual analytics and data analytics. And it's an incredibly brilliant team. who've built not only this dashboard, but even the ones you saw on the keynote video that are outside of our exec's office. But one of the things that I always challenge the team and even our customers who are asking for those dashboards, why do you need a dashboard? Why do you care? What behavior are you trying to drive? What outcome are you trying to get that you need a dashboard? So once they identify that, then we say, what data do you need in order to make that decision? Where does that data come from? And then how do we find a way to automate the capture of that data? It should be native and intuitive to your process flow. So if you're looking for reducing the time to close a defect, well, you need to know when did it get opened, when does it get closed, what status is it in, and how long does it sit in those statuses. So now you can start to automatically capture that data. And by using the Atlassian Analytics, we have direct access to that data platform. So we were able to start to build directly out of our systems with the data that we needed. Flow metrics is a pretty popular concept for most of you out there if you've heard of SAFe or any of those other methodologies, and the flow metrics has really become the new buzzword of what's going on. But once we were able to see that, and once we were able to actually have all of that data and all of that information, we were able to start to track and measure how we were doing. We saw a 389% increase in JSM tickets. So over 12,000 more JSM tickets this year than the year before. But we saw a 69% decrease or 4-day decrease in the time to actually deliver those tickets. And we saw a 140% increase, over 45,000 more issues year over year created in Jira software that we were able to start to track and visualize. And we saw a 58% decrease in the cycle time of those tickets, over 23 days faster to deliver and close out those tickets. And we saw a 474%, I actually just had to double check that because it was 474% increase in the number of test cases executed by starting to track our work in one centralized platform, by getting our vendors and our internal and external teams working together and collaborating in that centralized platform. And we saw a 76% increase in our defects. And while that may not sound like a good number, if you think about all the other numbers that I mentioned and the triple-digit growth rate that we saw for the intake and delivery, our defects increased, but at a much lower rate. So it shows that not only were we becoming more effective, we were becoming more efficient at getting that work out the door. So a couple key takeaways that I really want to hope you guys have and can share with you is when you're thinking about your intake, think about the types of requests that you get and think about what are the data requirements that you need for those requests so that you can approve them, you can prioritize them, and that you have the right information so that you can deliver them. And once you have that, when you have your defects, work with the people who are fixing them. Ask them, what is it that they need? What is the information they need to do their job? What are their data requirements? And then think about, what do you need to triage and resolve in your validation process? How do you drive that workflow? What pieces do you need for that work to flow through? And what is the data that you need at each step in that process? And do you have any way to do AI or machine learning once you have that data? We've actually been playing with several different technologies to take that data that we put on the defects and auto-assign which vendor is responsible. And then even not just the vendor, but based upon the last defect of that type, who fixed it from that vendor, and even identify the assignee that it needs to go to. So it goes directly to the person that's going to fix it. And then finally, when you have all of that, you have your reporting. What are your goals? What are your objectives for your reports? What data do you need for those goals and objectives? How do you capture it? And how do you visualize it? So really a couple key pieces. Obviously, there's much more that we can talk about. But where are we going? Where is Dish Wireless going? Our goal is to be tool agnostic, vendor agnostic. By leveraging APIs, we create that centralized collaboration platform that is able to integrate with any of our other teams or any of our vendors so that we don't have to swivel chair. And we've already got that in motion. We've already integrated with Cisco. We've already integrated with some of the AWS tools so that teams don't have to go back and forth and back and forth. So with that, I want to open it to questions. Any questions that you guys might have for what we've done, for what you're working on, anything that I can share with you guys? Awesome. Oh, question in the back. Yes, sir. So what tools are we using for analytics? So we're actually using the Atlassian Analytics. So it's directly within the system. And what's nice is that we're able to access that data platform and combine that with other data sources. And then we can create those visualizations in analytics itself, or we can actually do it within Jira or Confluence. So now the teams don't have to go back and forth and they can see directly in their systems. Yes, sir. Definitely. So AWS SageMaker is what they were doing. It was one of our data science teams was working on that. And they actually take all of the data that we get from the defects and they run that through the machine learning. And they're able to use that to say, okay, based upon these parameters and this environment, and these are the keywords that are coming up in the logs and the notes and all of that, they're able to say, we think that it should be Nokia. And based upon its Nokia, and here's these different parameters, it should be Bob Smith as the assignee because he's closed the last 4 of those types of defects. And now I believe it was close to 90% accuracy that they were getting by being able to do that. So I thought it was pretty impressive. We're continually learning and getting better, like everything with machine learning and AI, but really cool technology. Yes, sir. Pardon me? Definitely. So each of the vendors has their own project within Jira. So Nokia has its own project, and then we actually have a Nokia AD group. So one of the things that the team did, and this was a 9-month mission and absolutely incredible, was originally we had each of the vendors had their own domain email address. And so it was just literally manually cutting and pasting and adding the vendors into our system. But as I mentioned, we went from 0 to 4,000. It was not a sustainable system. So we required that all of the vendors had to have a dish.com email address. They submit that through ServiceNow. That goes in, it looks up their vendor type. Based upon their vendor type, it assigns them to the appropriate AD group. That AD group goes through Access and then puts them into the Atlassian system. And then that group has specific access to whichever project they belong to. And even better, even though they all have a dish.com domain, we actually add their vendor name to the end of it. So when you're looking at the ticket, it will say Adam Nichols dish, Bob Smith Nokia. So I can see very quickly if anything looks out of place. If I see Bob Smith Nokia is assigned to something to Samsung, that's a red flag. And we're even starting now to look at it and run more kind of data and JQLs and other queries to say if Bob Smith Nokia is in Samsung, send a notification, break it, reject it, and make it more efficient that way as well. So we have 12 different teams right now for JSM. So our team is one. Our transport team, which is responsible for building out the towers and working with those vendors, they actually have, I believe, 9 different forms for different types of requests. Our operations team use it. This can be the vendors, hey, I need to request something or I need an update, or it could be our teams talking to each other. And then it's dynamic field. So based upon the type of request, here's the options. Based upon those requests, continually making sure it really gets that data really refined. And then it goes to their leadership for approval. And then once it's approved, creates a user story and their backlog for them. Yes. Yes. We have about 22 different plugins. Yeah, give one of our brains of the operation are here with me. That would definitely be something I'm more than happy we can take offline. We use Script Runner for quite a bit of it. But the automation within the Atlassian platform itself has actually proven to be really incredible. There's a lot of automations. Yes, yes. 2 years ago was not quite there. But some of the improvements that they have lately have just really been amazing with what you can deliver. Yes, and yes, there were definitely a few limitations that we ran into. So the question was, did we run into any limitations when setting up the Atlassian analytics tool? There were some. I think we were lucky and fortunate enough to be part of the early adoption program. So we worked very closely with Atlassian and they were incredibly responsive. So some of it was access, some of it was table formats, some of it was just how that data was being stored. But we worked very closely and got a lot of that resolved. There are certain teams that, so the question is there any manual triage or is everything going through routing for JSM? There's a little bit, it depends upon the team. That's really what's nice about JSM is we have our PaaS, platform as a service team. They take their tickets, they do more of that triage up front because with them, it's a little bit nuanced of if it's this, but with that one condition, it can go to this team, but actually it's not that condition, but it's a different condition. It's with this vendor, so it needs to go to, so they do some of that, but we try to automate as much as we can up front, but it's really whatever works best for those teams. Awesome. Well, I love the questions. That means that you guys were awake and paying attention. So super excited. One note that I want to leave you guys with is you have to start with the people. This is really all about how do you solve the problems that the teams are having? And you want to support them with a good process. You want to put in a process that allows them to thrive and flourish. And then ultimately, once you have that, that's when you bring in the tools to make them even better. So thank you.